We've covered our favorite albums. Now let's talk about the ones that dropped the ball.
You blew it!
These are my top 10 most disappointing metal albums of 2023, and we're starting with Suicide Silence with Remember, You Must Die. Now remember, this isn't worst albums, it's just ones that didn't live up to my expectations, and regardless, this was definitely a bit of a bummer. Honestly, I wouldn't have had any expectations going into this one if not for that Thinking in Tongues single they dropped, which is unfortunately better than anything on this album and for whatever reason was not even included. There are still some solid additions here, like Kill Forever and God Be Damned, but even the best tracks just lack that same memorable, infectious quality of their earlier material. Once more, while this album might have impressed me more back in like 2014, there are just so many new projects in the mix now doing much more interesting and exciting things with Deathcore. Check out the tier list video I did to hear my thoughts on their entire discography, and also the Deathcore tier list to see which albums I did enjoy this year. But next up, we have Code Orange with The Above. Forever was honestly one of my favorite albums of the last decade, and I also enjoy both I Am King and Underneath, all for different reasons. With such a strong pedigree and teasing some new tricks, this seemed like it should have been a slam dunk, but the result is easily my least favorite from them so far.
Disappointed!
It's not a bad album, and there's a lot I respect about the experimentation here, especially as somebody who grew up during the peak era of 90s grunge and alternative. But the execution is just not there. This feels like a very messy compilation of unfinished ideas that needed a few more drafts. Even the Billy Corgan feature feels completely wasted on an otherwise solid song.
They failed to put any spin on it whatsoever, leaving many of these songs feeling like a random patchwork of clashing ideas.
When there are so many other top-shelf metallic hardcore bands out there dropping top-notch albums this year, it's hard to be mad at them for continuing to experiment. And if nothing else, at least it gave us a new favorite track in the Reba-driven Mirror. Then there's Baby Metal with The Other One. I had very few expectations going into this one, other than that it would be another fun sing-along metal album that even non-metal fans could probably enjoy, and especially given the increasing incorporation of other styles and genres into their repertoire leading up to Metal Galaxy, that didn't seem like a foregone conclusion. Instead, we ended up with something far more stripped back and serious, and frankly, that's not a bad thing. In fact, it only better highlights the very real vocal talents on display within this project. It's just that I don't come to Baby Metal for that. I want the wild, infectiously energetic stuff that never fails to put a smile on my face. Once again, no shame in shaking things up, but this didn't leave me enthusiastic about re-listens, but again, check out the tier list for more thoughts. Then there's Death Clock with Death Album 4. Speaking of losing the fun, this may be an even better example of that than Baby Metal. Let it be known that I have been a huge fan of Metalocalypse since the very first airing of episode 1. I own hard copies of all the albums, and I even saw them live with Mastodon, High on Fire, and Converge on the Adult Swim tour back in the day. With that context, I was pretty stoked to hear this, until they dropped that lead single, Aortic Desecration.
You bastard! Why you makes me do this?
From the songwriting to the vocal performance, right down to the production, this could not hold a candle to the likes of Mermaider, Bloodlines, or The Galaxy. And sadly, that same issue permeates the entire album. The infectious riffing and overt sense of humor just feel missing to me. The only song I really found myself jamming on repeat was Mutilation on a Saturday Night, and that's unfortunate for a band that features so much talent, including Gene Hoglan on drums.
Oh, that's brutal.
Yo, we still got plenty of albums left, but if you're enjoying the video, as always, hit the like button and comment your own biggest disappointments of the year down below. But next up is Polaris with Fatalism. such a bummer for this one, because for years now I have been heralding this band as one of the top 3 modern melodic metalcore bands out there worth listening to. For a while they were really carrying the torch passed on by bands like Under Oath back in the 2000s. Also, I'd argue, especially with albums like The Mortal Coil and The Death of Me, they are way better than fellow Aussie metalcore band Parkway Drive ever were, if you ask me. And especially with the recent death of guitarist Ryan Sue, it pains me to say that I did not love this album. It feels like yet another band falling into the same crappy derivative tropes that have been plaguing other bands like Architects for the last few years. Very few of these songs really stick with me. There are some great moments, but for the most part it just feels like another generic, interchangeable modern metalcore album that I've already forgotten virtually everything about. Hopefully they can rally for the next one. Then we have Immortal with War Against All. Another big one here, and arguably one of the biggest falls of this entire list. I had my doubts about Northern Chaos Gods after the split with Abath, but they managed to pull it off quite well. Surely Demonaz could do it again on his own, right? Wrong! There are some solid enough tracks here, like War Against All and Thunders of Darkness, and both No Sun and Return to Cold have a kind of hypnotic effect. But then I get seriously bored by the more plotting tracks like War God, Blashirk My Throne, and especially Nordlandir. And the fact that this is the album with the track named after the band feels like a bit of an ego trip to me. It's definitely missing the magic that makes this band work, and maybe another example of how an ego left unchecked is generally not the best thing for music.
I see it all now. You're just a bunch of yes men. I was making the wrong moves and you were too gutless to tell me. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
That answer.
Then there's Veil of Maya with Mother. I had really come to enjoy pretty much all this band's albums from their more humble days of straight-to-your-face deathcore to more recent forays into metalcore and progressive music. And frankly, I think that Matriarch is probably their best album pound for pound, so I'm not one of those purists who laments the old days. To be fair, the development of this album seems like it was pretty tough, with them scrapping basically an entire record before producing this one that we got. And unfortunately, the singles for that abandoned project sound way better than most of the ones we have here. Again, there are some jams to be found. Synthwave Vegan, Tokyo Chainsaw, Lost Creator, and Death Runner all go super hard, and I enjoy the more melodic side of Disco Kill Party. But outside of that, I really don't love the songwriting and further adjustments to the clean vocals, both in terms of performance and production. Even just a few little tweaks on this one would have gone a long way. Then there's Mephorash with Crystal Ah. This was one of my last big anticipated albums of 2023, given how much I loved 1557 in 2015. That album is like a spiraling portal with the sense that you're constantly slipping deeper and deeper into oblivion, and Shem Ha Mephorash was a solid follow-up. Unfortunately, this one takes a serious turn for doom and gloom. Now, like any entries on this list, results will vary based on your own personal taste. I saw a few people in the comments saying how much they loved this record, and more power to you if you're one of them. That said, it just doesn't have the same sense of scope or evil for me, and most of the time I'm just bored with its drifting aesthetic and lack of aggression and energy. I can respect what it's doing, but it's just not for me.
It's not my thing. It's not my thing. It's a lot of people's cup of tea, but it's not mine.
Then we have Chelsea Grin with Suffer in Heaven. Honestly, of all the albums on this list, I probably enjoyed this one the most. It even did relatively well on the Deathcore album tier list. That said, I just expected more from the second part of this project due to 1, how much I enjoyed part 1, and 2, the fact that it's fronted by the monster himself, Tom Barber, who has also been killing it the last few years with Darko. And credit where it's due, Tom is definitely the highlight here with his vocal acrobatics, but outside of that, it's a fairly typical Deathcore album from an instrumental standpoint. Lots of generic but enjoyable grooves and chugs with very little to really chew on or linger with me in any meaningful way. Favorite tracks on here: Orc March, The Mind of God, Sing to the Grave, and The Path to Suffering, but yeah, I just feel like we could have gotten a little bit more with this one.
So close.
And then we have In Flames with Foregone. Now, as I said, in this discography tier list, and by the way, I should just say, there's like a tier list for almost every discography on here that you can check out here on the channel. But anyways, this was the first time in over a decade I was actually excited for an In Flames album. Given how little I've enjoyed this band's post-2000s work, I had zero interest in a new album until they decided to go full aggro at the gates with State of Slow Decay. And then to show it wasn't just a fluke, they followed that up with the also excellent singles Meet Your Maker and The Great Deceiver, seeming to call back to the days of Soundtrack to Your Escape and Come Clarity. Fantastic guitar work across the board with Chris Broderick of Jag Panzer and Megadeth fame stepping into the fold. So the instrumentation is great. But unfortunately, Anders still manages to bring many of the deeper cuts down for me with more of his cheesier clean singing. I don't even dislike his cleans. I'm somebody who loves Reroute to Remain, but here it's often just over the line into lame territory. They could have easily knocked this out of the park, and I hope they do next time, but as it stands, I'm almost even more bitter given just how close they came to greatness again. Y'all check out this video for my favorite metal albums of 2023, or this one for even more disappointments, but that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.